The xeriex female was being escorted to the viewing area. She knows what's coming, and she really doesn't like it. Once inside her holding area, she would be stuck inside that clear 3-meter square box for the next 10 planetary rotations. While she's stuck there, numerous creatures would arrive and inspect her, and of course, the others. From where she was, she could see rows upon rows of dominated species that are held right there awaiting purchase. Inside the boxes are sentient and non-sentient species. More are non-sentient, of course, used mostly for arena battles and sometimes as pets. Sometimes just because they're pretty, sometimes because of protection. A few are for labor, of course, like the large green Tuscator that's in front of her. It sat opposite of her and seemed to show its teeth. Then the female realized that the Tuscator female wasn't actually growling or anything. She was simply letting her mouth droop, dropping her jaw wide. A sign from her species that her will has been broken, that she's basically just given up on things. To the xeriex female's right is a strange reptilian, clearly a non-sentient that moved back and forth erratically, and it's likely going to be tossed into the arena for its 15 seconds of glory, which is the average time it takes for most of these species to simply get torn in half. On the other side was an avian species that simply stood on its perch, unmoving, seemingly not caring about anything that's going on. The only way to see that it was even alive is the sudden quick turn of the head every once in a while, and of course the occasional drinking of water and eating of food. Turning around in the opposite direction of the Tuscator, she could see a very, very young xeriex. This xeriex was actually a male that must have just been separated from its school, as it just sat there in its semi-aquatic tank crying at its circumstance. She's seen this before, as the xeriex, they don't like being alone, ever. They prefer to be around their own kind, in large, massive herds or massive schools, depending on if they're above or below the waterline, of course. After this look around, she had plenty of time to think about her own circumstances. The young female thought about how she had not been sold before because she was just so young, and now she worried that she might be sold, as she had finally reached the age where she was now starting to show power, where she would start to get her dimorphism, where she would be used for purposes strictly unknown to her right now. As she sat and looked at all the dominant species walking around, examining the goods like her, a strange bipedal form moved in front of her. She was surprised, as a very few, if any, dominant species are bipedal. She focused on her memories, and at that moment she couldn't think of any dominant species that were. She looked up and down inquisitively at the form in front of her, and she wondered what could be behind that helmet. She knew that most everybody wore helmets, as the atmosphere was extremely overloaded with carbon monoxide. This was done as a safety precaution. That way, any attempts to escape once anybody breaks out of their cube would be pretty much futile. Reason being, without a helmet to filter in any more actual atmosphere needed to survive, most species would simply pass out and die within a couple minutes. Faster if they tried to fight away, as they were trying to pump in more air into their system. She continued to look up at the creature in front of her as another one looked at the Tuscator across the way. Then she looked around. She realized there were several of this unknown species around, all of them observing different boxes, but for some reason they seemed to be focusing more on the sentient species. Some even seemed to be taking notes on some strange pad of some sort. Some digital, some look like they're taking some sort of writing implement. It was odd. As she looked back at the first one, another one had joined it. She couldn't hear anything what was going on. Even so, it would be hard to understand through the helmet. But she realized they were actually conversing as they were looking at her. As they finally walked away, a realization struck her right in the face. There had been a rumor going around, mostly saying about a new world that had sentience had been found. This planet was absolutely covered in products like herself. She believed that she would be able to see new types of species then. But somehow, this planet had sentient species that had somehow shown great promise, as in promise to bring high profits. Though it wasn't too much longer before she eventually heard how this new species had not only pushed invaders away, but stole the invaders' technology. She remembered the thought that went through her mind at that moment. You can do that? Then she thought to herself, could that be the new species? If so, that would make sense why they would be a new dominant species that she had never seen before. Anyone strong enough to stop a planetary invasion from the other dominant species must be extremely powerful and extremely strong, or just meaner than all hell, something that made her shiver just slightly. Questions continued to go through her mind all day, even stopping her from sleeping as she curled up on the ground as her mind just would not stop. For the next few days, she actually looked forward to the auction. If nothing else, she would be able to see what this new species actually looked like. During the auction itself, every product is broken down into categories, and each category is done in a certain order. Categories like food, entertainment, pets, arena fodder, and of course leading up to the final category, which would be sentience. At this point, the products, such as herself, were taken out of the queues to be shown firsthand to potential buyers, to show that this is exactly what they're getting. This way, there is no question about returns because somebody paid for something they didn't actually want. As such, the buyers and the products would actually be breathing the same air at that point, meaning no need for helmets, no need for suits, and she would finally be able to see these things. Well, maybe. The female is escorted out of her box along with the Tuscator and the xeriex and over 40 others. The shot callers would actually force compliance as any of them tried to do anything stupid. And since she has felt that so many times she does not want to feel it again, it's best not to push her luck and simply do what she is told. Before being set on the stage, each species is stripped of whatever garments they might have. This could be from something that covered the entire body to a simple headband. Even the footwear they had, it was all removed, sometimes violently. This way the buyers could get an absolutely perfect look at what they would get. Then they were placed. Once on stage, she looked around a little bit, and the lights made it difficult to look across the crowd. All she could truly make out was the first few rows before the lights got so bright that she just had to turn away. However, even with her eyes squinting, she did notice something. There was still a large crowd. That's not normally how this happens. Usually the crowd thins out at this point. But with a large crowd, this means that many were looking for potential pleasure slaves, although this doesn't always mean the same thing. Sometimes pleasure is simply something they could strike whenever they're angry, something that is visually appealing, or anything of that nature. The thought actually made her shudder and nearly urinate herself when she thought perhaps there would be one to take her and do things that she did not want to think about. As the bidding began, the female listened close and could only understand about 10 of the languages out there. The rest sounded like shrieks and whistles to her ear. She tried not to move, but in her peripheral vision she could see the ones standing to her left and right were either shaking, crying, or both. This is understandable, as the fear of what awaited them scared them all to the deepest parts of their soul. Then they heard something odd. It sounded to her as though a booming bark had echoed loud enough across the arena that everyone went silent. She didn't know if the noise was the cause of the silence, the intimidating aura or sound that came out of it. Was it what was actually said? Whatever it was, had the dominant species in the front row looked panicked. That was something none of them had seen before. Dominant species afraid? This was strange. Then she saw the douche, the dominant species, that was actually conducting the auction ask, Is there any other bids? There was an argument about the lot. What it meant, she didn't know. She wasn't sure what exactly was going on, as she couldn't understand half of the languages, or even more so, that was going on. After some back and forth, the douche said, The entire stock to the humans for 80 kilos of refined plutonium. She was not sure what was going on or what exactly plutonium is, but she would have her answer fairly soon. Within hardly a minute of the closing bid, she saw something walking up on stage. She looked, and there were 6 of those bipedal creatures without their helmets and without their own suits. These creatures were tall. She was standing on something, and she wasn't even as tall as they were. She thought to herself that they have to be at least as tall, maybe a little taller, than the Tusketon. She looked closer and noticed binocular vision, which showed their predator species. But this didn't make sense, and she must have looked confused at them, as even though she did not see claws, spikes, fangs, or anything else to show dominance, these had to be a dominant species. These had to be some sort of predators if they were able to fight off anyone else. Though it didn't look like one. Each of them seemed to have a slightly different shade of whatever color that actually was. All she knew, it was in deep contrast to her dark purple skin, or the Kurzai's light blue. She didn't understand, but as she looked at them, one thing did stick out across all of this species. The musculature of these creatures makes even a Tusketer, which is the strongest out there, it puts them to shame. Even a quick look could show that the musculature was far denser than anything she had seen before. Perhaps this is how they were able to fight the others away from their planet, although brute force is not everything you need. What was she looking at? She tried not to stare as she saw them work out the final detail with the douche in charge and receive the command module for the shot callers. All of them. Then, after the security made all those who were standing there waiting to be auctioned off step back, these creatures, these humans, stretched their faces sideways and motioned with one of their extremely large upper appendages for everyone to follow another human, which of course they did. Even though all the products, like herself, are still afraid, they follow as the humans seemed to surround their line of newly purchased products. What surprised her is that these powerful beings were not looking in at their new acquired products trying to intimidate. Instead, they seemed to be forming a perimeter and looking out as though to protect their new prize. This was confirmed as a Famunda male tried to grab the Tusketor female in front of her. With lightning speed, the human reached out, grabbed all 4 tentacles that were trying to grab a hold of this Tusketor female, wrapped them up in one large group of manipulators at the end of their appendage, and with one appendage, only one, simply tossed it over the entire line, flying this Famunda at least 20 meters into a wall where everybody heard it go splat. All of its tendrils were sprayed out, and everybody was suddenly frozen. Everybody in that line were in complete awe as the body of the Famunda started to slide down the wall and then splat on the ground right next to a security. The security did nothing except chuckle just slightly, as it was clear that the Famunda had actually tried to steal or damage a product, which is a high crime in this area. After it seemed as though these humans confirmed that they were not in any type of trouble, the entire line continued again. The group that had just been purposed were told to stop short of an absolutely massive ship that had containers being offloaded. The young female looked at them and realized that they were being counted up and scanned, and realized that this must actually be the payment for her and the others. With confirmation from another douche to make sure that everything was in order, that the contents were actually good, the new purchased items were walked onto the ship. As they walked inside the ship, they were surprised how clean everything was, though the seemingly sterile environment made many think of medical experimentation. Some whispers started to begin as they worried of what was going to happen next. They were all walked through a doorway into a very large area, and as they sat down, a translated voice told everybody to just sit and wait for a moment. A human stood in front of everybody with the control module in hand, and all the new purchased products turned and looked and stared at them. The female knew what was going to happen. She knew, as she's experienced this before. This would be where these new masters reminded everybody who the master is by giving everybody a hard shock. Usually this shock is strong enough to bring one into unconsciousness. As this thought went through her mind, a human's translated voice began as everyone could feel the ship being released from its moorings and beginning to ascend. The voice said, "Now, before we begin our examination, there's something we have to take care of." The young female braced herself as the human raised the control high. Then there was a sudden rush of clicks across the room. Metallic clicks, before the collars all fell to the ground, making a huge racket as each of them crashed to the ground in multiple pieces. All the former slaves stopped, reached up, and felt around their necks. Sure enough, the shock collars, they were gone. They all looked at each other and almost would look into a reflection if they had one to look into. They couldn't believe what was going on. With the realization, some yelled in excitement, yet most simply sat in confusion. The young female believed this is only going to be temporary, as they can't escape a moving ship. Why have the shock collars if nobody can get anywhere? Then the voice continued through the translator. "From here, we will be taking you in groups to the head so that you can clean yourselves up. If you don't know how, feel free to ask for aid. Afterwards, we will be taking you to the infirmary for a full health check and screening. Once we're done, we will show you to your new quarters. From there, you will be shown to the galley where you will be able to eat your fill, and, of course, we'll show you the recreation hall in case you're bored. Does anyone have any questions?" There was absolute silence, as they had all learned that asking questions at all usually invited pain. And the more irritating the question, the more the pain. But you didn't know if the question was going to be irritating, so it's best to shut up. The young female xeriex was part of the very first group, shown to the bathing area after shown how to use the human toilet. She learned that word very quickly. The bathing area was set up as a communal area so that it could accommodate everyone with their own species' particular ideals. Whether they need to lick themselves off, whether they need to peel off an area of their carapace, maybe they shedded skin, feathers, or whatever. They also had areas where they could scrub themselves before they actually got into the tub. The young female xerexian was astounded. She wasn't sure if she was allowed to do this, but as everybody started to clean themselves, she did so, and this would actually be the first time she would be able to bathe in hot water. And she thought to herself how the sensation was just divine. Though she did have to deal with a few younger ones swimming in this massive tub of hot water, it was still absolutely wonderful against her skin. After a certain amount of time, she would have to actually leave as the next group was going to come in, and she was told to towel off. Of course, this led to a little bit of confusion as she didn't know what that meant. And, of course, after they dried themselves, they were led to an area that had clearly been set up for medical use. The young lady realized this and shook and hesitated at the idea of getting on the table. But a young human female simply walked up and very gently picked her up and placed her on the table so she could be examined. The examination was actually painless, and the vibrations resonating through her body made her feel better than ever. In fact, by the time everything was done and the capsule that was over her was released, a few of the scars she had acquired over time had simply disappeared. After that, they were brought to a long hall, several actually, with many small rooms on either side. Confusion gripped everybody as they were actually shown one by one these are, as the humans put it, your quarters. It was clear as she passed by that some were set up specifically for certain species, as they had more aquatic features or they had far less water in the air, whatever it might be. Even a perch for one of the more avian species. She was surprised. Inside her own quarters, she found the softest place to slumber and a place to interact with that actually had games and such. She even got giddy at the idea that it had its own human toilet. The young Xeriex female believed that she had actually died in the auction and now she's in heaven. There was even clothing in there for her to wear, and on the inside of the closet itself had instructions to show her how to place them on her body and even in what order. Before she could fully appreciate it, though, the group was actually called back out in the hallway and brought to the galley where they could smell so much food. The smell of food permeated through the area and made them all salivate. However, they did not move as they realized that they do not eat before their masters. Truly, this could not be for slaves, right? She thought. There's no way. This is when the human told them to get in line and they could simply ask for whatever foodstuffs were available. Yet he did preface this by saying, just don't eat too fast. No one's going to take it from you, so enjoy it. There's plenty. Eat to your heart content. I know you're all basically starving. And afterwards, head back to your rooms and get some sleep. It's going to be a long day tomorrow. After absolutely gorging herself and then waiting a little bit and then doing it again, the strange foodstuffs she enjoyed like pizza, chicken, cake, and even a strange drink that she absolutely thought was divine called milk. She headed back to her room as she could feel herself getting more and more tired. With a full stomach, a soft bed, clean sheets, as well as a clean body, sleep found her very quickly. Upon waking, she activated the lights and heard an announcement, an automated announcement that said, at 1000 hours, all new arrivals are to meet in the conference room. A map will be available on your data device. Without understanding what time is, actually, she rushed to attach the device onto her arm and follow it immediately to the room. Upon arriving, a human looked at her and told her she still had 3 hours before the briefing, and then, while again elongating its face sideways, said, you might as well go and get some breakfast. She had to look up the definition of breakfast, and then thought to herself, more food? You don't have to tell me twice. And she immediately turned and bolted down the hallway to the galley. Though it did take her a while to actually find it, she definitely got plenty. After once again getting her fill and having relaxing for a little bit, she arrived back at the room with plenty of time left, and she watched the others enter. She saw the young Kurzai almost dance through the door as he was so grateful to be on this ship. She saw the Tuscator no longer lowering its jaws as the light of hope had actually returned to her eyes. This made the xeriex happy. She didn't understand why she felt this way. Was she actually happy? Though she did wonder what was going to happen next. She waited as quietly as possible. She wasn't exactly good at conversation. She'd always been told never, ever to speak unless asked a question. And even then, she was always hesitant to even open her mouth the slightest little bit. The humans walked in, and one of the humans told everybody to take a seat. They all looked at him weird, and then he said, no, sit down in the seats. Actually, sit, please. The translator actually had some difficulty with this, but eventually everybody understood what was going on. They also started to take things serious because it looked as though the humans had serious faces. The human to the front said, you have all been brought here to listen and understand why we purchased you, making some strange motion with 2 of his digits on each hand when he said purchased. First things first, we humans despise the practice of purchasing someone and holding them in bondage. Even those humans that practice it are brought to justice by any means necessary. As of yesterday, you are no longer slaves. Instead, you will be given a choice. You can either be placed back on your own homeworlds right now, or you can stay here, learn how to fight, and then go back home and take your species back from bondage itself. There was silence, as the concept of even choosing was foreign to them, and they didn't understand how they could free themselves. The whole idea of that was just right past their heads, over their heads, around their heads, but it didn't sink in. The human continued, "We, as in humanity as a whole, do not have the military strength as of yet to free your species by force. Going to war with the rest of the galaxy will not change anything, except that we would no longer have the ability to provide any comforts." Everyone suddenly had a fear of losing all the great things they had. Warm beds, hot food, showers, everything, that they would lose that if humans did something stupid. And now they are listening very, very close. The human in front continued, "However, as an independent group of humans, as we are, we can train you and outfit you so that you can begin to free your own species. If you choose to train with us, it's not going to be easy. In fact, it's going to hurt sometimes, and it's going to hurt a lot. But in the end, you will not have to live in fear of being taken as prisoners ever again. Now, we will allow you to decide." With that, every single human left the room and said, "We'll come back in 5 minutes." And then, inside the room, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Those still inside the room after the humans left were either too afraid or too indoctrinated to even think about something like choice. In fact, the whole idea of choice made many of them almost break their own brains, as they simply sat there staring at nothing. Eventually, the humans came back, and they stood in front of the area, looking across the room, and asked, "What is your choice?" At that point, the room is still so quiet you could hear a mouse fart. The human sees the young xeriex female and points all his digits at her. "You, what is your choice?" All eyes are now on her, and she rises a little bit and bows low the way she has been indoctrinated to do so. And then she answers without raising her head, "I do not know. I do not understand choice. At least, not in the way you speak of, or the manner in which to understand it. We have never had choice." Then she raised her head a little bit. "Could you teach us?" The human once again stretched his mouth out to the side, slightly showing a row of white teeth, a move that made many of them nervous, as this is something usually a predator does. The human then answered, "You don't have to understand it yet, but you have to just make a choice. And if you're all ready to begin, we can start right now." Of course, there was no objections, and the first class on alien topography began. As this was happening, the slave masters were busy retrieving the precious plutonium from such strange human devices. This much plutonium would either fuel the reaction drives of an entire fleet for a damn near a millennia. The amount of this precious commodity the humans traded for simple groups of slaves makes the workers laugh, and laugh hysterically. The jokes just keep on going, and they keep writing themselves. As they joke, they laugh so hard that one of the technicians drops one of his tools. The tool drops in and causes one of the primers to ignite. Though the explosive that goes off is not enough to cause a cascading failure across all the nukes, it's enough to rupture one of the spheres, basically turning it into a dirty bomb. By the time anybody realizes what had just happened, the entire area is saturated with lethal levels of radiation. Because of this, the entire area where they sell their products has been contaminated, so much so that it's going to take several hundred years to decontaminate. It makes them wonder, where can they sell their next round of products? They would actually have to build an entirely new facility, which will be expensive. A facility this large with everything they're going to need? Prohibitively expensive. They just got done paying off the first one. They can't afford the next one. Besides, they can't even go in and get their payment right now because whatever the humans had is going to melt through the suits and kill whoever goes in there. As the different dominant species get together and try to figure out a plan, one simply says, "Perhaps we could sell the rest of the sentient products to the humans." Another one said, "If they're willing to pay so much for barely 50 products, think how much we're going to get for 10,000 sentient products. If we pull our resources, think about it." The one in charge of the entire operation hears this and says, "It sounds like the best idea. After all, what's the worst that could happen?" Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me today on this short, well, not all that short story. Before I go, I'd like to send out some special thank yous to a few of my supporters, and those will be MTF Guard, Erica Gem, SS Demon, Guardian Sage, Chris Dixon, and Sir. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.